Welcome to Matthew, chapter 5, verses 27 to 30. Adultery begins in the heart. The number that we're going to be featuring in this chapter is number 3431, adultery. And the grammatical structure is going to be uninflected words. You say, well, now what is an uninflected word? Every word that only spelt one way, except for the final vowel. When it's followed by another word starts with a vowel, then they can elide the last vowel in that word and put a little accent mark there. It does that quite often with they. And with inflection, we have a little article in our study guide. It says inflections are spelling aberrations that affect a word's meaning some way and follow a consistent pattern. They are located within describers. The parts of speech, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, verbs, etc., all are inflected, which by a change in spelling alters the meaning of the word. But preposition, adverb, and particles are not inflected. That is, they are always spelled the same way. You can continue and read that in our free study guide. Download it. Now we're going to be going through all these uninflected words, and we color-coded the uninflected words in blue. Some of them are particles, some of them are preposition, and there's one oddball in here, and that's an adverb. Remember, it said that adverbs are not inflected, and right down here we see the word ed. Now, an adverb says the adverb is any uninflected word that answers to the questions of when, where, how, and why. The words which answer the question will be adverbs of the classes below. And it goes in, you can read all about that in the study guide. So there's when already. It answers that. Now, as we begin the chapter in the Greek, it says, "Ikusate oti arethi tis archeis." You heard that it was said to the ancients, same as how it started in the last section, the ancients being like Moses and Abraham and so forth. Now, oti, do you think that's a preposition or a particle? I have to think about it myself now. Oti is a particle. And then it continues, umikevsis, you shall not commit adultery. This is what said. And it's quoting Exodus 20:14, where God says, you shall not commit adultery. In verse 28, ego they, lego. Now there's the they. Remember, that's another particle. It's postpositive that goes in front. If this letter was a vowel, then the epsilon would be taken out and would have the accent mark. But I say to you, imin, oti pas ovlepon gineka pros to epithemise avtin idi emich hevsen avtin entikardia av tu. Okay? But I say to you that all looking at a gineka. So adultery has to do with marriage. If you're having relations with another unmarried person, it's not, or anybody that wasn't married, you're not committing adultery. You're just having sex, and fornicating, I guess, would be a word that they have used, but it's not adultery. Adultery, it says in Exodus 20:14, as it mentioned, you shall not commit adultery. Exodus 20:10, it says, a man whoever should commit adultery with a man's wife, or whoever should commit adultery with a wife of his neighbor, to death let them be put to death. The man committing adultery and the wife committing adultery. But today in the United States, adultery is completely legal. A while back it wasn't. You could go to jail because of adultery. It was against the law. But as everything is falling apart now, that the rules that were there for us to become a good people have all fallen away, unfortunately. Jeremiah 3:9, it says, "And her harlotry was nothing to her." He's talking about Israel. "And she committed adultery with the wood and the stone." That is with the idols. So the idea there of adultery is with a spiritual adultery, that God is our spouse, and going to another God is adultery. In other places, going to another country to have other countries help us is a form of a spiritual adultery. In Revelations 2:22, it says, "Behold, I throw her into a bed, and the ones committing adultery with her into great affliction, unless they should repent from her works." And that was to the assembly in Thyatira, and talking about a woman that was ruling it named Jezebel. So now, I say to you that all looking at a wife. Now, some texts, English texts, could say a woman, but it's not a woman, it's a wife, because it's talking about adultery, talking about marriage. A man looking at a woman is natural. I mean, this is what life forms from attraction of the opposite sex, and then having marriage and children. This is what it was designed to do. So that is not the same. And a woman, number 1135, is also called a wife. It's the same Greek word for a wife or a woman. So you'll ask, well, how do I know the difference? Well, you can only tell the difference from the context, unless there's a way the Greeks knew it by other ways, which I don't know. But the only way I know of telling the difference between the usage of a wife or a woman is the context that word appears in. And then it says, "For lusting her already committed adultery with her." Now, lusting is another word that's very interesting. But a wife, it says in Genesis 2:22, "And the Lord built of the rib which he took from Adam into a woman, and led her to Adam." In Genesis 2:24, "Because of this a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall be for one flesh." Now, in both of these places is the same Greek word, but woman wasn't a wife yet in 2:22 of Genesis, but 2:24, it was a wife once they came together. Now, the lusting, as I said, is kind of an oddball, because there's actually 4 English words that are used for number 1937, epithemia, lusting. It says in Romans 7:7, "For also I knew not lust, except the law said, you shall not lust." So that's one place that it appears for lust. But then in Genesis 31:30, with Laban and Jacob, Laban says, "Well, now then go, for with desire you desire to go forth unto the house of your father." Now, the word is desire. It's not lusting. He didn't lust to go forth to the house, but it's the same Greek word, 1937. Then in Exodus 20:17, it says, "You shall not covet the wife of your neighbor." Coveting. You could use lusting. You shall not lust after the wife of your neighbor, but covet is used so many places in the history of the English Bibles, I hate to take it out. And so covet is another one. And then the last is 1 Corinthians 10:6, and it says, "But these things became models for us, to not be cravers, as those also were cravers." And he's talking about the people in the wilderness that were craving after meat. lusting is more of a sexual, has a sexual connotation, and the cravers just doesn't fit. And desiring, we don't want to be, well, everybody's desiring, so that didn't really fit. And let them not be covet, they're not coveting something, coveting a wife. So these just didn't fit into it. So that's why I just wanted to show you that right here it is lusting, and it's from the context, because it's after looking at a wife of another man. If you do that, Jesus says already, and here is the adverb, he already committed adultery with her and there's a preposition in the heart, or his heart, kardia. Now, how do you commit adultery in your heart? That's an interesting word also, kardia. Apparently the ancients, they might not have known too much about the internal organs of the body and checked them all out and give them all names. They may and may not. I don't know. I haven't studied that deeply into physiology. But if they did and they saw the muscle we call the heart, they may have called it something completely different. Nothing, not the heart. It would be a different word. And this meant that muscle inside. But the word in the Bible, kardia, is not referring to anatomy. It's not referring to our heart. It's referring to a sort of thing of the mind, a thought. It says in Genesis 6:5, "And the Lord God, beholding that the evils of men were multiplying upon the earth, and that all whatever man considered in his heart was diligently upon the wicked things all the days." So man considering in his heart. Well, we don't consider in that muscle. We consider it in our brain. So it's more of the mind. Whenever you say heart, it's cardia, because we have the word cardiac arrest, cardiology, but a mind would be a closer correct transliteration, but then a mind, there's other words that are for the mind also. And so it's a deep subject, but we're studying cardia here, so we'll continue with that. In Genesis 20, verse 5, it says, "With a clean heart and with righteousness of hands I did this," and a clean heart. So your heart is not inside, it's not clean, it has blood all over it. Then Exodus 4:21, it says, "But I will harden his heart," Pharaoh, hardening the heart. You can't harden the heart. You can harden the person's thoughts, or that he would only think one way or so, but not the heart as we know it. So you might argue at that point, but there is this article I found on the internet, and it has 70 idioms with heart. A big heart, said of someone kind and loving, loves me after my own heart, someone with similar preferences of values. A heart of gold, heart of stone, all heart, a bleeding heart, break one's heart, by heart, close to heart, in heart, cross my heart, didn't have the heart, and on and down here, this scroll on down, you can see them all and read them all, come back and stop and enjoy this graph. The heart of the matter. Isn't it amazing? 70 idioms that we use for heart. Verse 29, it continues, they, particles, o ophthalmosou, o dexios, scandalisi, say, and if your right eye, dexia, dexterous person, right-handed, ophthalmology, derivatives, causes you to stumble, scandalizi, scandal, exela, avton, take it out. K, another particle, and vale, aposou, and throw it from, in the preposition of you. Now they're always spelt the same way. Sympherigar, see, ina apolite, en ton melon, su. For it is advantageous, and gar, again, is a particle with a postpositive, gar and de, is advantageous to you that one of your members should be destroyed, ke and me olon to soma su, blithi is ge'anan, and your entire body should not be thrown into is as a preposition, ge'anan, Gehenna. Gehenna. Now, is he figuratively saying this, or is he literally saying this? Well, he doesn't really want you to cut anything off, so in a way it's figurative, but it's literal as far as you'd be better off if you did do that than continue in your sin. So it can take both ways, first part figurative and second part literal. Now, being thrown into Gehenna, we saw that, I think it was in the last section where it ended up with Gehenna, and it tied it into prison because of the man that owed Lord of the Manor $1,000, and the Lord of the Manor forgave him, and the man went out and beat a man that owed him $1, and then the Lord of the prison had the man arrested and thrown into prison to pay up all the money he owed. So Gehenna is a type of prison, or Hades in the Greek. In the Hebrew, in the English, it would be Hades, or in the Latin, hell. Be thrown into Gehenna. And Gehenna was a valley that was in the south, as I mentioned the last time, the southern valley outside of the walls of Jerusalem, where they had fires and they burned their children to Moloch. It says in Matthew 10:28, though, but you fear rather the one being able both soul and body to destroy in Gehenna. God is the one to fear. He's the one that can send us to Gehenna. Matthew 18:9, to be thrown into the Gehenna of fire. So here we get the idea that it's a place of fire, which it was literally in Jerusalem. And then in Matthew 23:15, it talks about a son of Gehenna, becoming a son of Gehenna, where you're going to be burned. In Matthew 22:33, Jesus says, I think it was to the Pharisees and scribes, serpents, offspring of vipers, how should you flee from the judgment of Gehenna? There's going to be a judgment and being thrown into Hades. How are you going to flee from that? And then James 3:6, he says, the writer James says, thus the tongue is placed among our members, staining the entire body, and blazing the whirlwind of creation, and being set ablaze by Gehenna. Gehenna is that place where the fires are burning, and this is where we get the idea of Hades or hell, in the burning fires that we see in so many different types of books and pictures, with going to someplace that you'll be in this fire. Also, the rich man and the poor man Lazarus, when the rich man died, he went to Hades, and he asked Abraham to send a man to touch his tongue because it was so hot there. So the idea of Gehenna and Hades and heat and prison are all someplace I don't want to go, and I'm sure you don't want to go either, and we don't have to go there if we walk in Jesus, do the things he says, and he will deliver us from this life into the next to be with him in paradise, just as he did with the thief on the cross next to him. And it ends in verse 30, Ke, and if, two particles. If, whenever E is, generally it's if, or sometimes since, depends on the context there with that word. And since, it could be since, and since your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. Now, I think that's figuratively, and throw it from you, figuratively, but then literally, for it is advantageous to you that one of your members should be destroyed, and your entire body should not be thrown into Gehenna. So if something is causing you to sin, is a problem, then get rid of it. I would not recommend cutting any member of the body off. Best thing to do is to change your attitude and your mind and your behavior, and that would, I believe, would suffice, that you would be a repentant person, basically, walking the way Jesus would have you walk, so that when he takes you and takes you up with him, you will be acceptable to him. He doesn't want to go and have to take somebody to heaven that is unrepentant and doing all kinds of terrible things and hating God. No, I don't think Jesus wants to be with that person. So I suppose we need to look at ourselves and say, well, am I in a position that if Jesus came, would he want to take me with him into heaven? And I hope that I could say yes, and you also. Dismissing a wife, the next section.